Right. Perfect. Okay, so I will share my screen and just give us a little rundown of the agenda today. But just at a high level, we're really going to be focusing on wrapping up any thoughts, feedback that you have to the report, and then getting ready for presentations to the WTDB in December. Just looking at a breakdown, had a great tone set by Keelan. Thank you so much for that. We'll review the timeline, kind of do another process check. Then we'll have a conversation kind of confirming the assessment report, reviewing any questions you have, getting any points of clarification we need to address. Then we're really going to have a discussion about what sort of shifts in the KIC's role might come out of some of the recommendations in the report and some of the work that you all have been doing to really think about, next steps. And then we'll break out into three breakout rooms where we'll actually be addressing those recommendations and getting everyone prepared with the content that we would want to present to the WTDB and kind of getting our key messages aligned. And then we'll kind of wrap with next steps and make sure everyone knows who's going to do what by when so that we're all prepped for that meeting. And if there are no questions, then I will go ahead and jump to just doing a little look at our timeline. So you can see by the star, we're like right at this wonderful transition period between, the kind of report development and into the final report. So you can see we just have a little bit more to go, but I just love this moment of looking back at a timeline and seeing how much work has already happened, really everything that had to go into getting us here. Just always gives me a lot of appreciation for everything you all have done so far. And with that, Susan, I will pass it to you to give us a little bit of a grounding in how we're going to look at the report and then lead us in a discussion of the findings.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here today. So great to see everyone. Very excited to be at this point in the process with you all. And as Jen just kind of flashed on the timeline, I was just thinking back to all the KIC conversations that we had to get us here. We had our initial kind of project kickoff with you all where we talked about, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And this report being focused on kind of checking the work that had been done and determining the recommendations that need to happen moving forward. And you all were so supportive when we were having an open dialogue around the initial assessment and the governance assessment and where did you think those activities were at and, areas of opportunity for us to explore further with those that we were interviewing and talking with. And then when we shared back the initial findings, if you recall that KIC meeting, and I can recall many of you saying, this looks very familiar. We have talked about these things. These are not a surprise. And really wanting your work together as a KIC to be really future focused and looking at how to drive change within the system. Then we had a great discussion about, the level of change you wanted and the change levers, and great discussion and dialogue around, did you want incremental, more continuous change, disruptive change, transformational change, and then really being committed as a group to say, okay, with this context of what type of change we want, with these prioritized levers, who's going to help us build some of those action plans. In the report, you'll notice that the report is broken out between kind of the first part of there's some context and history about the KIC and the laws and legislation that have all, impact and make up the system that you're all operating in. And then the first part of the report is really that assessment piece. It's that check of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle around how did you do with the items from the initial assessment and the governance assessment. And then the second half of the report is really about that forward-looking piece. Our role in Coragio is to do that, make sure that we're doing that independent assessment. We looked at a lot of documents that were shared. We had a lot of great conversations, and to kind of give you our best thought on where things are, to kind of confirm what your initial thinking was on where you had made progress and where there is still a opportunity to continue to drive some of those recommendations forward. You all, the kick, you own the action plan and the action steps. So that's why we're going to devote a good part of today and really making sure that you think about your shift and helping drive that action plan forward. Jen, if you can go to the next slide. Again, I've spoken a lot to this plan, do, check, act cycle. Again, the focus of the look back part of the assessment and looking at the initial assessment and governance assessment was to check, what was the data? Did, or what was the improvement? Did you have data or did we have evidence to indicate that the improvement was made? And what might need to happen forward is that act piece. Next slide, Jen. Thanks. And here were the key insights that you probably saw in the report. Some improvements have been made within the system. I think we all talked we heard this from you that the system continues to struggle to make large scale improvements. And that you all agreed that some strategic shifts need to happen to drive improvements within the system. I think I'm turning it back over to you, John. You're going to talk about these prioritized recommendations.
Thank you, Susan. So big recommendations, as you recall, first to establish a governor mandate regarding system transformation. Next being create greater alignment between the state and local workforce boards that define related authority, roles, and responsibilities. The third recommendation is to unify and consolidate our reporting on a system-wide performance metrics. And then finally, explore reorganizing the state level WIOA program and funding structure. So you've got some great recommendations that are really, really big, and some that are really sort of a realignment and a clarity on roles, responsibilities, and how we can best kind of be able to row together and be looking at the same metrics for performance. And Sarah, I know you were checking, making sure that our team's folks were back, but wanted to see if you're ready to help the kick kind of think about some of these key questions regarding the report.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So we wanted to hold a little bit of time for reflection and dialogue related to the report. I just included it. I know we sent it out last week for your review, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to do that. But again, I just included it in the chat, so you've got it handy. So we wanted to start with that assessment portion. So the front end of the report, which Susan mentioned, is us, Coraggio, delivering that third-party assessment, and see if you had any need for any clarity on that portion, any questions or clarifications that we can offer on our assessment. Todd, did I see a hand from you? Yeah, Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I was just reflecting on how busy some folks might be and wondering if they had a chance to dig into the report since it was sent out, and wondering if it might be possible for you to sort of walk through and provide a bit of an overview, and that might help folks sort of think about it, stimulate some thinking if folks don't have any questions that come to mind. Just a thought.
Yeah, we could do that. That will impact our time for the other things we're hoping to do today. So curious if that's something that would be helpful to folks, maybe just to put it out there. Todd's request, is there anybody who would like us to walk through the report? Paul, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to suggest that I have intimate details with all 27 pages of the report per Todd's comment, but I do want to talk about these 4 items. Based on what I have read through the report, there's a fair amount of kind of historical background. Here's what we're doing here, and then here's what we've learned from other places. This first item, to establish a governor mandate regarding system transformation, like I attended an event last week and the governor mentioned something about workforce, and I was kind of stunned by what she had to say about it. At least among the people that are here that feel like they've been part of this process all year, do you think that there is any likelihood that we will get Governor Kotek's interest enough to even understand what we are asking for in that first item? And B, is our ask clear enough? What seems unlikely to me is that there's much value in getting Kotek to say, yeah, go transform the system. And so I just would love to hear, if not so much from Coraggio, but from the actual members of this committee, like, do we know what we're asking for there and how we would even know if we're successful at that? Because that feels way too broad to me and of limited value without more context.
Thanks, Paul. And we'll open it up for others to respond. I might suggest just scanning and looking at page 25, where it outlines the context and action steps for that particular recommendation, just so folks can see what the subcommittee was envisioning for that process. But then I'll step back and open it up based on your request, Paul, to members of the committee's comment.
That's a great example where I definitely did not make it to page 25.
I thought a hybrid suggestion might be between Todd's request, Sarah, and what you were saying, in terms of running out of time, is that maybe as you divide us into the 4 groups, we just spend like 3 minutes on that particular bullet, that group, because I'm assuming group 1 is the first bullet, group 2 is the second bullet. Is that right? Or
yeah, we
like
do
that.
have 2 of them combined. I believe it's 1 and 4. Is that right, team? Yeah, 1 and 4 are combined into one breakout, but yeah, otherwise.
So maybe we do it in the room, and then that way you're not going through all of them. Todd, if you're okay with that, and then we can always, if we have time at the end, come back around and say, okay, for those of you that weren't in there, here's a little more specificity, like the page 25 one, like you just referenced, or whatever. That'd be my suggestion.
Okay, thanks for that suggestion, Anna. It looks like that works for Todd. So let's take that route. And then, Jen, if you want to go to the next slide, we can come back to these reflection questions. So welcome any clarifying questions that folks have related to the assessment portion. And then looking at where Paul just helped direct our attention to the action plan, which begins on page 25, that the subcommittees of the KIC worked on, where we would outline the action steps for each of those 4 recommendations. Does anyone have any questions or concerns with the action plans that were developed by your fellow KIC members in those subcommittees? Yeah, Debbie. I saw your hand, Debbie, but we can't hear you. Looks like you're still muted.
Okay, page 11 and 12 I'm referring to, and this talks about looking at the other state workforce systems and what they're doing, and then it goes into that I had heard this, I think, from Tara, but there's already money and funding and a mission going on, if you will, to improve the iMatch. Is that what I understand? And that's a true thing. So even though it's part of our evaluation, or Coraggio did, that was already going on. So it's not like we need to really do much more there. Do I have that right?
I think the conversation about iMatch was to put pressure on them to move that forward
Okay.
more rapidly than they have been. Am I right on that, Todd and Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's to highlight the importance of that work under the modernization efforts that we've heard about from the employment department back upstream. It is a bit challenging given the prescriptive requirements around IT projects, of which that one is. I think it also includes review and better understanding of other tech platforms that could potentially be, or in part, are already being utilized, i.e., LinkedIn with business services over at the employment department, utilized to improve skill capturing and matching to certain career pathways, occupations, jobs. I don't know, Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, beyond just sort of trying to expedite that effort, which I think we are all interested in doing, but it's like, how do they take the recommendations and the concerns that have been raised through the assessment process and make sure that from a data perspective, because it is going to be the primary data system that underlies the WorkSource Oregon system, right? So making sure that they're taking into consideration a lot of the recommendations and concerns that have been raised. And then I think being transparent about what ones they can and can't address. I mean, I think what we've all heard, and I see you nodding, Debbie, and I appreciate that. It's like, there's always sort of this like, well, we can't do that because, there's confidentiality issues or this kind of issue. Well, once that's brought up, that's like a deal breaker. Like, you can't go anywhere if someone says, well, I can't share that data with you. I think they need to be transparent about where those impediments are. And then as leadership of the system, we have to have a mechanism in place to address those roadblocks and to determine whether or not, well, does it need a regulatory change? Does it need, is that real, or who's not part of the system and who's in the system? So I think it's really sort of more comprehensive, like seeding that, yes, this is going to be the underpinnings of a new version of WorkSource Oregon data system. So we need it to be responsive to these other needs and concerns if we're going to move the system forward. It can't be done in isolation. Otherwise, we run the risk of not making any progress and also, sort of undermining our capacity to deal with continuous improvement.
One of the areas that I think employers are most frustrated about, and so I'm going to keep harping on that as an employer. So the point I would make is that, so they're working on this. This isn't really part of our recommendations, or it, as you mentioned, I appreciate that we could say, and somehow in our recommendations, that yes, this will be transparent, will be information that's shared. There will be a better path, that we have found out from the interviews and the work we've done that has to be improved. And working with LinkedIn and AI, as was mentioned here, are great help. And so I just want to emphasize that work. But then even a bit on that is that I think there should be a continued follow-up evaluation of this and some accountability that it's getting done, and that employers are getting what they need. If there's been a big investment or is going on, that employers are getting what they're expecting from it, because all these things that they're working on, and then we come out, we're still at the same boat. That isn't going to be any. So if we have a recommendation to make about that, I'd want to be sure that we're being heard and included at all all levels of that into how that iMatch works, not just for the job seeker, but for the employer as well.
I think that's right on, Debbie. I couldn't agree more. It's like, and we've been clear about like what measures do we need the system to be able to report on. And, I mean, I think we haven't really mentioned it, but I think really with AI and with all the other advances in technology that we're seeing, really we need a talent management system. We need to understand what talent is out there, what skills do they have, how do we access them, where are the gaps, and then as a state, how do we invest to fill those gaps if we're seeing gaps? And the only way to understand that fully is when employers are able to provide that kind of feedback. Like, I'm not getting what I need from that system, so how do I change it to be more responsive to the needs of employers? So 100% on that from me anyway.
And the one thing I'll add is at the Working Together conference, there was a table called Monster, and they used to be kind of like LinkedIn, I guess, but they were people who would help people find jobs. And talking to her, I spent a half an hour listening to her. I could have listened to her for all day, I guess. But what I found is I believe she said they're the ones that Texas is using. And what I thought was interesting about what she said that I brought back was that it connects all of the information together. So somebody coming in for one particular need, that information, a job seeker or a person needing assistance isn't having to repeat and repeat and repeat. And I'm not the one, there at the desk trying to help someone, but if that system, if iMatch doesn't do what Monster apparently does, or what I heard her saying, and I don't know, are we moving towards that? If that's what Texas is using and that's what's out there, so that even the person that's doing the data entry has the information from the other ways that someone might be getting into the state system and having a central database. And someone mentioned confidentiality and all of that. So I'm sure there's things there, but all I'm throwing out is that Monsters seem to have a way of doing that. And I'm pretty sure she said Texas. So how do we share those concerns or thoughts with whomever's making those decisions?
Sarah, can I jump in here for a minute? Because I think what we can do is clarify in the assessment part of the report, kind of this, I know from the due diligence we did that Jim Farr from OED, who's the key project manager for OED's workforce modernization system, he comes to the OWP, I believe he comes to the Workforce Talent Development Board, I believe he's come to the KIC. So I think maybe we can tighten up the language a bit in that piece of the report to make sure that opportunity in that venue to have that two-way dialogue between the workforce modernization project and these avenues for continuous improvement are continuing to flow in a way that need to be, because the timing's right, because they haven't gone out to RFP yet, or they're going to be going out shortly. So it's you still have time to influence that design and those requirements. So Sarah, does that sound like a good next step for this part of the conversation that I'm hearing?
Yeah, thanks so much for raising it, Debbie, and Susan. Thanks for coming up with a concrete way that we can adjust the report to make sure we're making that recommendation. So thank you. We will work on some added language in that section.
Yeah, I think that
Any
sounds
other?
really, really good. And if I could just jump in, the last I talked to Jim Farr, it sounded like they were at that point in time. I feel like this has been maybe 3 months ago, 2 months ago. They had scheduled in their modernization meetings opportunities for companies to come in and present on other options that were available in the marketplace that were not only off the shelf but customizable options. So that said, just to bring it up, to let you, I don't know particularly at this moment in time where they're at with that, but I think that Debbie, they're trying to consider a number of different options in addition to improving the iMatch skills platform that can potentially better meet the needs of employers and businesses that are trying to use it on that side, as far as finding and hiring talent. But I also think on the job seeker side, participants also have struggled with the user friendliness of iMatch backup stream. So it would be really interesting to hear what the latest is from Jim Farr and folks.
Yeah, one other thing that would be very important for employers is to have the salary survey part of it. What are the current rates for various people in the department? And what I have to do now is I have to contact the work source and then ask them for a specific job, and they run reports and then they give me something back. And so, I'm asking them to do work that I think could be in a database somehow. So that's just an example.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I want to make sure we've got some time to think about the shifts in role for the KIC that this action plan represents, and then to move into those breakout groups. And of course, want to make sure we also hold ample time here for any questions, suggested shifts, concerns. So anything else on folks' mind before we transition? Okay. We are also interested to hear what you're excited about as related to the action plans. But I think some of that might emerge as we go to the next section. So Jen, if you want to move us forward. So we wanted to acknowledge that as you all review that action plan and you think about the work ahead over the coming 6 months and what has been mapped out, it will require something different from the way that you all operate. And so we put together some of our initial thoughts on what might look different based on this action plan and this new way of working. But this is just a starter, and we'd really love your all's eyes on this and your thoughts on what it represents from your perspective. So as we thought about how will you need to work together differently, some of what we think might be required is that there will need to be some work happening in between meetings. So that would likely include organizing into some subcommittees to move work forward and folks owning specific deliverables within these action plans. Similarly, your meeting structure, these meetings might have to function differently in terms of what you're focusing on and what you're discussing. So it may be that you need to use these meeting times for progress updates on that work that's happening on the action plans, for folks to raise any risk factors or barriers that are coming up as it relates to successful implementation of the action plans, or requests for additional support. Additionally, in terms of what you all are learning about and thinking about together, identifying those best practices that can be spread and scaled across the system. This might include, as Debbie was just saying, looking at what other states are doing in some areas, and then addressing resources needed to spread and scale those best practices. And so that what that might look like in terms of your overall role evolving, it may require more engagement directly with the WTDB, may require acting as spokespeople for with the governor and the legislature, as Paul was raising, like what's the appetite for some of these changes? What kinds of conversations might we need to have with the governor or legislature? And then also really driving that alignment between state and local resources will be a key part of your role as you look at what's happening in the action plan. So again, these were just some things that we saw as potential shifts, but would love to open it up for y'all's reactions, changes, or additions as you think about what might need to shift.
I got a couple of things. One of them is that I'm always curious as to what's working, what's helping, what are people excited about in their regions. And I don't feel like I get, and I don't have time to read maybe, I mean, it's out there, but if there was just, 5 minutes of the meeting to share something that has benefited someone throughout the local workforce boards or at the state level, that would be helpful to me to kind of get on that momentum and to be, excited about something good going on. And so successes to me are important. The other one is the local boards. I was on the local board and went to the state board, and then I got on this kick. And so I'm out of the loop and in really what the local board is doing on a regular basis. So I would like to be getting regular emails or updates, whatever it is that they do. I think their, let's say their minutes or something should be shared from all the local boards with us, and we can read which ones we want. But the beginning of it, maybe we ask them to be feedback to us. The first part of their minutes and action or whatever is, this is what we can report to the workforce board on what we're doing, and what we need help on, or what we'd like input on, or whatever that might be. And then the other one is the frequently asked questions, and this might be somewhere that I don't know about, but what are the frequently asked questions of employers? And those might be shared in each of the networks so that other employers, just like me asking about salary surveys for the region, I'm going around now and telling all the employers, did you know that WorkSource will do this for you? But you have to ask, and here's the person you ask, so we can then share that with the local chambers, and we can prepare a place where employers are going, wow, look what's going on here. Even if it's stuff that's been going on, they just didn't know about it. But how do we be the advocates for that?
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate your thoughtful suggestions. I think there's a little bit of a syncing delay, but I've added those 3 suggestions here. Others' thoughts on shifts to your role as a kick that the action plan and the work within it represents and will require. Do these resonate? Maybe just to kind of check. So again, we wanted to put these forward. These are some things like that that we thought of. Thank you, Brett. I saw your thumbs up, but just curious from anyone else. Do you agree with these as required shifts? Great. Okay. Great. I see some nodding heads.
I like the working between meetings too, and smaller groups, because then we don't feel like we're taking all the time of the meeting, but we can really fully, get into it. So.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah. All right. Well, I do want to ensure that we have time to prepare for the WTDB meeting coming up. So any other final thoughts? We'll transition to that step of our process. All right. And Susan, I think I'm kicking it to you to take us through this.
You are. Thanks, Sarah. So I think you all know the report is scheduled to go to the WTDB December 6th. The kick is on the WTDB agenda for their meeting on December 13th. And a quick flow of the time we've got from 1:40 to 3 p.m. on the WTDB agenda. And just a quick overview of how that time is going to flow. Kaylin and Chris, I think you're going to do a nice little kickoff of things to the WTDB. And then the Coraggio team's going to discuss the process, a little bit about the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And then we are going to ask for KIC members to present the recommendations to the WTDB. And the flow that we had envisioned is that each recommendation would be telling a little bit of the story, why the work is important, what level of change is needed, what do you need from the WTDB to help make this change happen, and then allow a little bit of discussion time for WTDB members to answer the question to put forward is, what do they think they need to do to help put the recommendations into action? So that's a little bit of the flow of the time for that WTDB meeting. What we'd like to do now, and we've got Sarah and Jen, I'm thinking we probably only have about 15 minutes. Is that about right? Because we need to come back and do a 5-minute close. We're going to go into some breakout rooms and we're going to at least start to get some notes around how to tell that story. Why is it important? What's the level of change needed? And what do you need from the WTDB? Jen and Sarah, I'm not sure if we have preset groups. Do we have preset groups that we're breaking people into?
We do, but this is a great moment. We can kind of align, make sure that folks are in the right spot. So as Susan mentioned, we're going to have 3 breakout groups. What I try to do is align if you were on the subcommittee that worked on that one, and then folks who weren't on subcommittees kind of distributed as equally as we can. But I've got Susan, you in room 1 covering number 1 and number 4, and that'll be with Andrew, Brent, Jennifer, Chris, and Todd. And then I will take group 2, and that'll be with Clay, Debbie, Joe, and Kaylin. And then Sarah would take number 3 with Anne, Ashley, Paul, and Aaliyah. Anyone want to trade groups, shake things up? How's that landing?
I think I'm seeing thumbs up from folks, Jen.
Great.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to break into the breakout groups. We'll have about 15 minutes. Jen, Sarah, and I are going to be facilitating the conversation. We're going to be capturing as many notes as we can. If there's questions about the action plan, we will address those in the breakout groups. Jen, let's open up the rooms. Let's get people talking.
Sounds good.
It's been downhill ever since.
I don't know about that. Looking good, brother.
Hi, y'all. How are you doing? Just doing a quick check that everyone ended up in a room. Okay, perfect. Well, I can maybe share screen again, and then I'll just sort of take notes on these 3 questions. All right, and so we are looking at that number 2, creating greater alignment between the state and local workforce boards and define related authority, roles, and responsibilities. Before kind of diving in, is there anything that we need to go back to the report and clarify, or does this one feel pretty good? We can kind of take a look at the action steps together if that's helpful, but.
Great.
Awesome. Well, if it feels clear, unless we want to go back to the report, I'll just kind of record your thoughts on
Oh, one of the things that would be helpful for me is what were we trying to solve for? I need a couple of reminders as to what we were solving for. Were there a couple of challenges and opportunities that we called out?
Yeah, so this one, it evolved from that initial, sort of clarifying authority just for the WTDB. And the way it evolved is now just making sure that the authority of the WTDB in relationship to local workforce boards is more clearly defined. So it's not like, the WTDB is trying to take over authority. It's just really clarifying, like, what are they really supposed to be doing in terms of supporting local workforce boards, and where are some places where, as we clarify their authority, local workforce boards will clearly continue to have, agency and authority over the subject matter that they deal with. I don't know if that makes sense, or if others have a clear way of saying that.
And there's a bit, I mean, if you go to the second box, it's the clearly defining the roles and responsibilities. Because when we first started this whole thing, there was just, we decided there's all these different agencies and people working on things, but how do we know how they're all connected and who's responsible for what, and making sure we're not overlapping where we don't need to, or that there's a misstep somewhere that could be benefit the groups working on something and the other one doesn't know about. I will keep going back to, and I don't know if it's in here or not, but it's the redundancy and the extra money that's being spent by the state to do regulatory type items by one division or the other. That is one of the things that I was hopeful we could accomplish. But that would just be one example of how, the kind of siloed, and people don't really know what each of them are doing and how they're working together.
So
Well, and if
Debbie, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Joe. I was just going to add really quickly another aspect, which would be, in some cases, there is kind of an absence of authority for things that might be beneficial to the system. So, for example, if we wanted to implement something across the state that we found as a best practice, right now it's a little more challenging because we'd have to sort of approach people sort of one at a time and to try to encourage them. There's no sort of entity that could create like a state initiative that would be statewide. So there's kind of in some cases some absence of authority that would be beneficial to the system if it were there, and this clarifying of roles would get to that too.
Joe, does that answer, or does it still feel like a little bit unclear, what the challenges we're trying to address?
Well, yeah, no, I think it's all coming back to me, but I was thinking about what I was going to comment on is maybe consider the benefits as opposed to the deficit. So I'm just thinking, why is this important? So what's the opposite of lots of different agencies, right? Better definite. What's the flip side to that? How can we say that why this is important is because there are opportunities too, right? That's just where I was thinking, and I think we can call out the areas that were challenged in around what is the level of change needed potentially. So rather than need to clarify which So that this is important because to provide clarity, right? Kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you could save money, you could share successes
Right,
together,
yes.
you can have a faster rollout of a new initiative.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I keep thinking of is that it's not just impacting one system, right? It's impacting it's impacting the job seekers, it's impacting the small businesses, it's impacting the communities. It's this beautiful trickle down effect of, clarity and working together to really benefit the good of all.
This kind of also, we put in here the partnering with the governor. And who is it at the governor's office? I know people have been asking, is the governor going to really be receptive to this? Is there going to be, but I think that is a key part of this, is the communication with the top leadership as those things need to happen, right? Because everybody's got to be rowing together. I saw the governor has on a website, she showed it to us in a meeting, goals, and shows where individual people that are in charge have to be meeting or exceeding those goals. There's much more accountability with this governor, it appears. And so how that might play into that discussion with the governor, I think that that's something that will touch her, as she appears to be much more interested in accountability, that money being spent is being used wisely, and whatever those, simple measurable goals are being tracked.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's like a great way to connect this one to some of the other recommendations about the governor's office. Did I capture that correctly, Debbie, or is there more you would, I just said it, helps communication with governor's office, helps define our shared mission, and increases transparency and accountability. Did that capture anything, or is there anything you'd want me to change?
Yeah, I just don't know how the Gonna go back to the original. Greater alignment between the state and local workforce boards and define related authority roles and responsibilities. So responsibilities is the one I would be wanting a word in there about that she's, who is responsible and what is the outcome expected. Is that the Workforce Development Board? Is it the KIC? Is it the all these other local boards? Is it the work source themselves? How do we defining that? And then as I think Clay said, I love that, because that's one of the strategies here, or one of the action steps, is really to be able to say we're going to be able to put something out to the entire state without a lot of bureaucracy, right? So if something's working in one workforce board and they've proven to save money and get more people involved or, hired, then that could be a back to the Workforce Development Talent Board and say, we want this done in every county now. How soon are you going to do it? If we have the authority as a Workforce Development Talent Board member to make that initiative, we're not waiting for whomever, and what department makes that decision, I don't know. But I think the whole part of this Coraggio thing was to align the state Workforce Development Talent Board in a way that they have more authority to actually make things happen statewide. Am I saying that right, Clay? I'm just picking up a whole bunch of pieces of conversations we've had, but that's kind of what I got the gist of.
I think you did a great job.
Okay.
I love that.
Another thing is in terms of why it's important, Jen, I'd like to just recognize that it's the voice of the people. So that's why this is important, that it's not the kick that's coming and saying this is why, but that this is truly, we are working with the local workforce boards and the state workforce board to really drive this change because we are talking. It's like, it's equal opportunity to really bring the voice of the people.
Yeah, that is really well said. I wonder, I know we're getting a little bit close to time. These two,
Oh,
based on the report, the level of change needed was transformational.
I'm good with that.
And then the lever was the system structure.
Yeah. And it defined, would that lever be under or would there be something about the defined role responsibilities, kind of why we put it important? Some of that carry into the lever.
Yeah, if we want to, I mean, I think it'll be helpful to like
Okay.
talk about all the levers and then kind of point to, this is how we're
Okay.
this one get addressed here. Because I think it gives a good map of like you all did have a nice distribution of like different kinds of levers, different levels of change.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we could just take a few minutes and just think about what do you think this would require from the WTDB to make this happen?
Boy, that's a tough one for me because I don't know what authority they have right now. I mean, is there funding? Is it support to the governor? Is it a letter to the governor that we believe in this? Is it communication to the workforce boards? To what authority does the Workforce Talent Development Board really have in any of the persons that might be resistant or not understanding that the board should be communicating that?
Yeah, no, that seems like step one, right? It's just really concrete and crisp about what is the authority. And I know there's a document that kind of defines a role in the system, but doing good more to simplify it.
Now, as I understand it, the local workforce boards, come under the state workforce talent and development board in some way. There is a connection there. So is there communication? Is the communication come from the WTDB to all these other entities? Or do they go to the local boards and then that gets distributed out? Or how are we getting buy-in, and people getting excited about this or the possible improvement? Is that coming from WTDB or someone else?
I think to some extent this relies on the first priority, number one. And I think all of the clarifying authority and those kinds of things are the governor's office is going to have to participate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm realizing, looking at time, that we've got to close the breakout groups. So I'm going to go ahead and close them, and I will see you back in the main room.
Jen, did you close the breakout?
I did.
Okay, great. Looks like everybody's back. Good.
Woo, that was so fast.
So fast.
Jen, are you closing us out with next steps?
Yeah, let me just share really quick. I know that felt really fast. And I know that we're going to have the opportunity offline between now and December 13th to really get crisp, make sure that everyone feels aligned on what we're going to communicate and get you some kind of background slides to be able to do that as well. So I hope this is the start of that presentation and conversation and you don't feel like that this is the end. So like we said, we need to submit the report by 12/6. And so if there's any other comments or feedback or anything else that we need to hear from you, just know that we're going to sort of shift it into design and get moving on it. But, we have until the 6th when we submit it. Would love to reach out to these different groups. So we've tried to reach out to some individuals to ask, who would be willing to be there at the meeting and to be able to present. But again, want to keep lines of communication open and make sure that you all feel good about that presentation. And then once the WTDB approves the report, then it'll go to the governor's office on 12/15. Susan, Sarah, anything else we missed? I know we're right at time, but want to make sure that we covered everything. Okay, so if you're interested in presenting and we haven't reached out yet, please get in contact. Otherwise, we'll reach back out again to folks, make sure that we feel aligned, and just really look forward to seeing you all on the 13th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.